You know, I think we tend to walk through the world with this very specific and deeply ingrained set of expectations about how life is structured.
Right, yeah. Especially with the natural world.
Exactly. We carry around this sort of implicit biological geometry in our heads, like a seed goes into the dirt,
Hmm.
and the roots push downward into the dark to find water, and the stem pushes upward into the light to build the plant.
The standard model.
Right. It's a vertical contract. We just expect growth to be visible, standing tall, and really easily separated into an above-ground reality and a below-ground reality.
And, I mean, it's a framework that makes sense, right?
Yeah.
Because it describes the vast majority of our interactions with the cultivated world.
Yeah, the stuff we actually plant.
Exactly. We have this profound vertical bias. Whether we're talking about trees lining a street or vegetables in a garden or, even the architecture of our own cities.
Upward mobility.
Yeah, upward trajectory is always progress. But the moment you step outside of cultivated environments, the moment you look at how organisms operate when they are left entirely to their own evolutionary devices.
The rules change.
Completely. That neat, predictable geometry often just completely falls apart.
And that is exactly what we are going to explore today on this deep dive. We are looking at an architecture that is entirely hidden, somewhat rebellious, I would say, and just brilliant in its design.
It really is.
So today's deep dive is centered on a very short, but honestly incredibly revealing piece of source material. It's an excerpt from a gardening blog published just today, actually, June 24th, 2026, by a gardener who simply goes by the name Ang.
Just Ang.
Just Ang. And the post is titled, let me get this right, Notes on Gardening, Part 935, Harnessing Rhizomes for Fern Propagation.
What a title.
Right. So our mission today is to really decode the hidden underground mechanics of a specific wild plant and, look at how one gardener's breakthrough fundamentally challenges our traditional assumptions about growth and really about problem solving in general.
The title itself is a fantastic starting point, like Part 935.
I know, nearly 1,000 posts.
That number tells us we are dropping into the middle of a massive, ongoing body of work. It implies this relentless, long-term dedication to observation.
Yeah, Ang is clearly not looking for a quick, viral gardening hack here.
Not at all. This is someone who's been meticulously documenting the trial and error of cultivation for, well, a very long time.
Which makes the opening confession of this post so striking to me.
Oh, the frustration is real.
It is, because after 934 previous entries, Ang opens this post by admitting a persistent failure. Like, Ang writes to the readers, "If you recall, I have been investigating the propagation of ferns, especially wild ferns, for some time, but without much success."
And, there is a very specific kind of frustration that comes with trying to cultivate a wild organism.
Oh, sure. I mean, we've all hit a wall trying to learn a new skill or cultivate a new habit, right?
Yeah, but with plants, when we buy a domesticated houseplant, we are buying something that has been selectively bred over generations to tolerate human environment.
Right, it's used to us.
Exactly. It has been genetically trained, in a sense, to thrive in our standardized pots, our potting soils, our living room temperatures.
It's playing by our rules.
But a wild fern is an entirely different entity. I mean, these are ancient organisms that have survived on their own terms for millions of years.
Millions?
Yeah, they operate on a completely different biological logic, and they are notoriously resistant to our standard methods of propagation.
It's the ultimate clash of intentions, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely.
You have this human methodology trying to impose a cultivated framework onto a biological system that it simply refuses to cooperate.
It's stubborn.
It's super stubborn. Ang is putting in the effort, investigating, trying different techniques, and just hitting a wall over and over. Okay, let's unpack this. Because the crucial pivot in the source material isn't like a new chemical fertilizer or some fancy change in lighting. The pivot is a moment of purely passive observation.
That's the key.
Right. Ang didn't suddenly figure out how to force the fern to propagate. Ang just noticed that the fern had already done it.
Exactly. Passive observation is huge in any discipline. Ang writes, however, I did discover that one of the ferns did self-propagate.
Just on its own.
Just on its own. And Ang actually includes a photograph in the blog post as physical evidence of this, which to me marks a profound shift in the dynamic between the gardener and the plant.
How so?
Well, Ang stops trying to be the architect of the fern's growth, right? And instead becomes a witness to the fern's own survival strategy.
Wow, yeah.
The wild fern basically bypassed all of Eng's interventions and solved the problem using its own localized mechanisms.
Which immediately raises the core question of this whole deep dive, I think.
Yeah, how did it do it?
If all these standard above-ground attempts at propagation were failing miserably, how did this stubborn wild fern manage to clone itself right under the gardener's nose?
Right under the soil, literally.
Literally. And Eng provides the answer immediately, noting that the self-propagation happened, and this is a quote, through a rhizome.
The rhizome.
The rhizome.
This is the hidden architecture we were talking about earlier. It is the absolute key to the wild fern's resilience. And Eng is very careful to define exactly what this structure is for the readers.
Because it's not obvious, right?
Not at all. If you aren't actively studying botany, the mechanics of a rhizome are deeply counterintuitive. Eng defines it first and foremost as a modified creeping stem.
Okay, that phrase, modified creeping stem, is a paradox right out of the gate.
It really is.
Because we just talked about our vertical bias, the expectation that stems go up and roots go down.
Right, stems belong in the air.
Right. But here, Eng is identifying a stem that has entirely abandoned the vertical world.
It said no thank you to the sky.
Exactly. It is modified. It has completely sacrificed the pursuit of sunlight to exist entirely underground. And it is creeping, which, that means it is growing horizontally through the soil.
What's fascinating here is how it completely inverts the biological contract we were just talking about.
Yeah.
When we think of evolutionary adaptation, we usually think of a plant trying to outcompete its neighbors, right? But growing taller, reaching for more light, dominating the canopy.
The biggest tree wins.
Exactly. But the wild fern has adopted a strategy of stealth and evasion.
Stealth. I love that.
By modifying its stem to grow horizontally beneath the surface, it removes its most vital infrastructure from the vulnerable above-ground world.
Oh, wow. So it's hiding its most important parts.
Yes. It is protected from harsh weather, from grazing animals, from environmental volatility. It is this highly localized, decentralized survival strategy.
It makes me think about the way we structure resources in, the human world.
How do you mean?
Well, normally we think of stems as vertical pillars holding up leaves, right? Like a storefront.
Right.
But this rhizome is like an underground horizontal nutrient bank account that just creeps along, funding new plant life.
That is a perfect analogy. An underground bank account.
Because Eng's notes perfectly align with that. The source explicitly states that the primary function of this rhizome is to be, quote, a part of the plant that stores nutrients.
And that is a critical distinction to make. It isn't just a root blindly pushing through the dirt looking for water. It is a highly specialized storage facility.
A vault.
A creeping vault. While the above-ground fronds, the leaves we see, are photosynthesizing and dealing with the wind and the sun, they are constantly funneling their surplus energy down into this hidden stem.
Depositing funds into the account.
Yes. The rhizome creeps laterally, slowly extending its reach and hoarding this massive reserve of biological capital along the way.
And what does a biological organism do with a massive reserve of stored capital?
It expands.
It funds its own expansion. Eng points out that this nutrient vault is precisely what allows the plant to propagate vegetatively.
And vegetative propagation is such a fascinating evolutionary workaround.
Wait, can we pause on that term, vegetative propagation? What does that actually mean in this context?
So most plants rely heavily on sexual reproduction, right? Dropping seeds, or spores in the case of ferns, relying on the wind or insects, and basically just hoping those little genetic packages land in an ideal environment.
Sounds like a lot of hoping.
It is. It is a high-risk, high-attrition strategy. Millions of spores might die for one to succeed, but vegetative propagation bypasses all of that uncertainty.
Because it's essentially self-cloning.
Exactly. Because the rhizome is already established underground, and because it is already packed with those stored nutrients we talked about, the fern doesn't need to gamble on spores finding perfect soil.
Right, it's already in the soil.
Yes, it just uses its own horizontal vault to push up a perfect, genetically identical copy of itself further down the line. It acts as its own investor.
Yeah. That is incredible. It's like franchising itself.
It is. And if you think about the environmental pressures a wild fern faces, the brilliance of this strategy just becomes obvious.
Oh, sure.
Like if a sudden frost kills the visible plant, or some animal comes along and eats all the fronds, the organism hasn't actually died.
Because the bank is still intact.
The underground rhizome remains perfectly intact, fully funded, and ready to deploy a new clone as soon as the conditions improve above ground.
It is an architecture built entirely around risk mitigation.
Precisely.
Which honestly completely explains why Aang was having such a hard time trying to propagate these ferns originally.
Oh, absolutely.
Right, because if you are a gardener focused on the above-ground plant, taking cuttings from the leaves or messing with spores,
Right.
you are entirely missing the engine of the operation.
You're trying to withdraw money from the storefront instead of the vault?
Yes. The fern wasn't failing to grow. It was just operating on a horizontal subterranean timeline that Aang hadn't tapped into yet.
It was doing its own thing.
It really was. But this brings up an anatomical question from the source material that actually forced me to stop and reread the text.
Oh, let's hear it.
Okay, so we have established that this thick, nutrient-storing horizontal structure creeping through the dirt is anatomically classified as a stem.
Correct.
But wait a second. If the stem is underground, where exactly do the roots fit into this equation?
That is the big question.
Right, because if the rhizome is creeping around underground, I think most people, definitely, including me, would just look at that thick thing in the dirt and assume, well, that's the root.
It is a completely logical assumption, and it is exactly why Aang takes the time to clarify the morphology in the next section of the blog post.
Thank goodness Aang did, because I was lost.
Aang writes, the actual roots are those that extend from the rhizome instead of from the primary root system.
Okay, so let me get this straight. You're telling me the roots are actually growing out of this creeping underground stem. That is wild. So the stem is crawling horizontally through the soil, and it is just sprouting its own roots as it goes.
Exactly. It isn't relying on a central taproot that goes deep into the earth like a carrot or an oak tree might.
Right.
It is a mobile stem that generates a localized root system on demand.
On demand.
Yeah. Botanically, a stem is defined by having nodes and internodes, basically, points where new growth, like leaves or lateral shoots, can emerge.
Okay.
The rhizome retains that exact stem anatomy, it's just adapted for the dirt. The roots that emerge from it are a completely separate structure, and Aang gives us the technical term for them. They are adventitious roots.
Adventitious roots. I love that term. It sounds like they're improvising, like they're on an adventure.
That is actually a highly accurate way to conceptualize them.
Really?
Yeah. In botany, adventitious refers to structures that develop in unusual or unexpected places, like roots growing out of a stem or a leaf, rather than from the embryonic root tissue of a seed.
So they are literally rule breakers.
They are. Because the fern has chosen this creeping horizontal lifestyle, it cannot rely on a single stationary primary root. It would rip itself out of the ground as it grew.
Oh, of course. If it's creeping forward, a central anchor would just hold it back.
Exactly. It needs a supply chain that travels with it.
It is a remarkable division of labor down there.
It really is.
And Aang makes a point to contrast the function of these adventitious roots with the function in the rhizome itself. Like, we know the rhizome is the vault, right? It stores the nutrients, it handles the vegetative cloning. But what are the adventitious roots actually doing while the rhizome is busy creeping?
Aang states they have two very specific jobs. They, quote, allow the fern to anchor itself and absorb water and minerals.
Okay, so the creeping stem is like the chassis of this underground vehicle. It holds the cargo.
No,
But a thick, nutrient-dense stem probably isn't designed to easily soak up ambient moisture.
no, it's too thick. It's built for storage, not absorption.
Got it. And because it is creeping horizontally just below the surface, I imagine it is incredibly vulnerable to being uprooted or shifted by soil movement.
Exactly. The rhizome needs stability, and it needs raw materials to keep funding the clones.
Right.
So at various nodes along its horizontal journey, it shoots down these adventitious roots. They act as the anchors, physically gripping the surrounding soil to lock that section of the creeping stem in place.
Securing the perimeter.
Securing it, yes.
Yeah.
And simultaneously, they act as the biological sponges, actively pulling in the localized water and minerals required to keep the main vault funded.
It is a highly modular system, so the fern is constantly, abandoning older sections of the rhizome that might be depleted.
While the active growing tip pushes forward, dropping new adventitious roots to secure fresh territory and tap into new water sources.
Wow. It is an underground logistics network that is constantly moving, securing, and extracting.
Moving, securing, extracting, exactly. And when you map out that level of biological sophistication, the sheer futility of trying to force standard propagation methods onto a wild fern becomes starkly clear.
It's like trying to reboot a supercomputer with a wrench.
Pretty much. You just cannot treat a highly mobile, decentralized, self-cloning underground network as if it were a delicate, vertically dependent houseplant.
Which brings us really beautifully to the resolution of Eng's post.
Yes.
Because armed with this visual evidence of self-propagation and having completely mapped out this underground architecture, the modified creeping stem and its localized adventitious supply lines, Eng makes a definitive shift in strategy.
It is the natural conclusion to rigorous observation, right? Once you understand the mechanism, your methodology has to change to accommodate it.
So what does this all mean? Like, what does Eng actually do next?
Well, the final sentence of the blog post reads, "Perhaps we can explore propagation through this rhizome."
And that's it.
Followed simply by "till the next post."
Till the next post. Man, it is such a quiet, casual ending, but it represents a massive paradigm shift for the gardener.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it is the shift from resistance to alignment.
Ooh, I like that. Resistance to alignment.
Because Eng is abandoning the frustrated attempts to make the fern behave according to human expectations. By deciding to explore propagation through the rhizome, Eng is actively choosing to co-opt the plant's own evolutionary genius.
Instead of fighting it.
Exactly.
Huh.
Nature provided the blueprint.
It's really about recognizing where the power actually lies in the system.
Yes.
The fern's entire game plan is vegetative propagation. It wants to clone itself. It has built an expansive, nutrient-rich underground bank account specifically for that purpose.
Is ready to go.
Right. So Eng's new strategy is essentially to just stop fighting the fern's nature and instead figure out how to give that natural mechanism the precise conditions it needs to trigger on command.
And that, I think, is the ultimate takeaway from this brief botanical dispatch.
For sure.
Whether you were dealing with wild plants or, complex mechanical systems or even stubborn structural problems in your own work, there is a profound difference between imposing a solution and discovering one.
Imposing versus discovering.
Yeah. Eng's initial failures weren't due to a lack of effort. 934 previous posts proved the effort was there.
Plenty of effort.
The failures were due to a misalignment with the reality of the system. By stepping back, observing the anomaly, that single fern that self-propagated, and taking the time to understand the hidden anatomy driving that success, Eng found the actual path forward.
It really is a masterclass in adapting to the reality of the organism. You have to learn the architecture of the problem before you can harness it.
Very well said.
So just to recap the journey for you listening, we started this deep dive looking at a gardener's very relatable frustration, right? Hitting a wall after, like you said, 934 attempts at trying to make something grow using our standard vertical rules. But through pure, unrushed observation, that frustration revealed the brilliant, hidden mechanics of the rhizome. A stem that rejected verticality to become a creeping, horizontal nutrient fault.
Supported by a modular network of adventitious roots acting as anchors and supply lines.
Exactly. It's a reminder to apply that observe and adapt mindset to our own frustrating projects, because sometimes the solution is already working right in front of you, just, slightly out of sight.
And it leaves us with a truly fascinating perspective on the world just beneath the surface.
Yeah.
Yeah. Eng's breakdown of the modified creeping stem forces us to confront how much of the natural world operates in total defiance of our expectations.
Because we only look at the top.
Exactly. We look at a forest floor or a patch of wild brush, and we assume we are seeing the complete picture simply because we can see the leaves and the vertical stalks.
When in reality, the true engines of survival are often operating entirely out of sight, right? Horizontally networking and hoarding resources in ways we rarely even stop to consider.
Exactly. Think about it. If a wild fern can completely modify its fundamental anatomy, abandoning the sun and transforming its stem to live sideways in the dirt just to ensure its survival, it makes you wonder what other invisible, highly adapted systems are thriving right beneath our feet.
Oh, wow. That's a little eerie, but mostly amazing.
We build our understanding of the world based on what is visible. But the most resilient architectures, the ones that survive across millions of years, are very often the ones that figured out how to quietly creep beneath the surface, completely ignoring our rules of how things are supposed to grow.
That is a brilliant thought to carry with us. The next time you find yourself frustrated by a system that refuses to cooperate, it might just be worth asking if you are simply looking at the leaves while the actual engine is operating somewhere entirely different.
Exactly.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We will be back next time with another source and another hidden architecture to explore.